Let's get back now to that high-stakes summit between the U.S. and Chinese presidents set to begin in the coming hours. Joe Biden and Xi Jinping are holding the virtual talks as tensions increase on a range of issues between the two economic superpowers. We're learning that White House officials are preparing the American president for three main topics of discussion. First, how to engage in intense competition with China while avoiding military conflict. Second, areas of disagreement, such as Beijing's military buildup in the South China Sea. And finally, areas of cooperation, such as the pledge by both countries to work together to slow climate change. Time now for the exchange, where we take a closer look at the state of relations between the world's two largest economies. Bonnie Glaser is the director of the Asia program at the German Marshall Fund, and she joins me now live from Western Virginia. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
What do you think the tone of this meeting should be? Is this meeting more about the relationship, the building of a relationship, or rebuilding, hitting the reset button between China and the U.S., or should this be a situation where Biden takes a stand, spelling out the rules of the road of what China should and shouldn't do?
Well, first, I think we have to remember that President Biden, before he became president, had many, many interactions with China's leader, Xi Jinping, first when he was vice president and then later on when he was elevated to the country's senior-most leader. And when they do talk, and they have talked twice on the phone previously, they have had a positive tone in their relationship. They've talked about their families and the things they like to eat, as well as the problems in the world. So I think there will be a positive tone in the relationship. But President Biden is going to stand up for American interests. He will very clearly express concerns, I would guess, about human rights, for example, in China, concerns about China's military buildup, its nuclear buildup, which the Pentagon is very concerned about. There will be, yes, discussion about potential areas of cooperation, how we might move forward on climate. But I think the most important component of this conversation is about how to manage competition, because competition doesn't have to lead to conflict. It doesn't have to be a Cold War. It doesn't have to be zero sum. And this relationship really needs to find a new equilibrium that might not be achieved overnight through one summit between the leaders. It's going to be a process. But the framework for this relationship between the U.S. and China of the past is really no longer sufficient or relevant.
And on that issue of competition, is there concern that there could be empty promises on the part of the Chinese leader? Example here, there is legislation to boost U.S. competitiveness with China, to fund semiconductors. I mean, it does face an uphill battle on Capitol Hill, but there is a report showing that Beijing was sort of courting executives, business leaders to push back on any kind of language that would sort of up the game for the U.S. So is there a concern that Xi Jinping will maybe say something, but then behind the scenes do something else when it comes to that issue of competitiveness?
Well, we do have a pattern in the past of Xi Jinping telling the United States some promises that have not been fulfilled. And he did pledge not to militarize, for example, the artificial islands that the Chinese built in the South China Sea, and pledged not to use cyber means to get information that would then give Chinese companies a commercial advantage. So I think that the United States is crystal clear about the risks of getting promises that don't have any means of ensuring compliance with down the road. But, the Chinese shouldn't be interfering with the United States and members of Congress on issues like how we are going to compete with China in areas related to semiconductors or anything else.
And you had mentioned that Xi Jinping and Joe Biden, they've been friends for years. They were, friends when they were both vice presidents. But there are serious issues on the table here. I mean, China has been stepping up its threats to use force against Taiwan by holding military exercises, sending planes to that island or close to the island. Is there anything that Biden can do in this conversation to move the needle to get Xi Jinping to back off?
Well, Allison, I think that's exactly the hope of President Biden. And I would caveat just by saying I don't know if President Biden would say Xi Jinping is a friend, but they have had a history together. They have talked and they know something about each other. So there is some basis of history and perhaps even a bit of trust there, but I wouldn't exaggerate that. So I think that President Biden is going to really try to find ways to reduce risk of conflict between the two countries, to prevent the relationship from spiraling downward into a more Cold War type relationship. Taiwan is really going to be a focus of this conversation because Taiwan is the one issue that the U.S. and China really could go to war over, and it is the most sensitive issue in the bilateral relationship. So I think that President Biden is going to try to send some very strong signals about U.S. support for preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, but also reassure Xi Jinping that the United States has a one China policy and doesn't support independence for Taiwan. So it's very important, I think, that President Biden is going to convey our concerns, our positions, and we hope that the Chinese leader will do the same.
Now, Beijing is hosting the 2022 Winter Olympic Games in February. Do you think that Xi is going to invite President Biden? And if he does, what's the significance of it, and if he doesn't as well?
Well, I would be quite surprised if Xi Jinping invited President Biden. In fact, these invitations come from the International Olympic Committees. Xi Jinping might suggest that it would be nice to have President Biden come. But I think that there is unlikely to be senior level representation. In fact, there may not be any U.S. official representation at the opening or closing ceremonies of the Olympics. As you know, the Biden administration has said that China has committed and is committing genocide in Xinjiang. And so I believe that the Biden administration is likely to encourage, of course, American athletes to participate. That's what I think most American allies and partners want to do, but to essentially have a diplomatic boycott to signal our dissatisfaction with the human rights record of China.
Okay, Bonnie Glaser, thanks so much for your expertise today.